Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, everyone, and welcome again to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. Good to have you listening along today, because we're talking about something that is very important to families in Northwest and, frankly, all of Kansas. Our guest is Kathy Kersenbrock-Ostmeyer. She goes by Kathy KO. And Kathy, welcome to our program.
It's great to be here.
Kathy, one of the things, you are a leader in special ed. You just recently testified in Topeka about special ed and the need for funding for special ed programs. You're actually the director of special ed in Northwest Kansas, the Educational Service Center there, so covering Northwest Kansas. But before we go and talk about special ed, that is such an important thing for so many families that have special needs kids. What was your decision point? Who were your mentors that got you into the special ed business?
Gosh, that's going back quite a ways because I've been working for 42 years in special education. But I guess probably clear back even in high school, it was working with children and youth was always interesting to me. And when I first went into college, I was looking at family life and human development, more in terms of just working with young children. And then I did a little internship at what was the Institute of Logopedics. Now it's HeartSpring. And I worked with a lot of individuals with disabilities. And the bigger concern area was that of behavior. And I found that I was really good at it. And so I said, they need more of this in public school. And they said, well, there is that. It's under special education, emotional disabilities. And so I went back and got my master's in that. I had a bachelor's degree out of K-State, but my master's was out of Fort Hays State in special education. And I've never looked back and loved it ever since.
If you've done it 42 years, you have to love that. And touching the kids that you have along the way that have the needs that they have is so important. You've been working on the funding battle now. Making sure that special ed is funded correctly. You were testifying in Topeka. What happened in that testimony? Was your testimony received well?
Well, by the time I testified, which was later in the afternoon, and we'd been there all day, I was trying to really focus on some of the issues that had been brought up earlier related to the need to fund special ed at what's called 92% of excess cost. And what that means is the cost that it takes above and beyond educating children that don't have disabilities. And so a year ago, there had been some data and information that went in front of the Education Committee in the House. And they were using what was developed originally as a state funding formula, looking at the 92% of excess cost, and then asking that it be applied per district. Well, when you use a formula that's applied based upon state figures to individual districts, it doesn't work. And so that report indicated all kinds of crazy figures where it appeared that some places were using or getting way more than their fair share of special ed funding and others weren't. But my point is that you can't use a flawed approach like that because it's not going to give you the real picture. The real picture is looking at it at the statewide basis. And so even though I pointed out some of those issues, there are some individuals in the legislature that don't want to fund education or special education. They don't want to give any more money there. And so they keep going back to flawed information, and it's almost like a shell game. Well, we think that we have put in the money, so we don't want to put in more. And the state's Department of Ed is saying, but here's the figure, and here's what's in statute and how we do it. And this is how it breaks out at the state level, which indicates this year alone, $155 million deficit. Next year, it looks like about $225.6 million deficit.
So to understand it right, the Kansas law says that the state must fund over or cover 92% of the excess cost of special education. But as I understand it, the figures show that the state actually funds less than 70%. Is that correct?
Right. In fact, some current figures are indicating around 68% this year. So it's significant below the figures that we feel it should be at.
Well, Kathy, you've been You've been teaching special ed and being a part of special ed for 42 years. Somebody that doesn't have a student in special ed, what's the difference? What's the need here? Why this extra funding? Because 155 million is a lot of money. Why do the school systems actually need this extra money?
Well, it's certainly very complicated, but one of the main issues is we do know that educating students that have special needs is going to cost more. There's more support staff involved. Of course, there's all different levels of individuals just with disabilities. And so it ranges from children and youth with very mild disabilities to children and youth that have very significant disabilities. And so the costs of related services such as PT, OT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, specialists working in deaf and hard of hearing or visual impairments, as well as then all of the special education teachers that are out there, counselors, school psychologists, all cost more than it would for a typically developing child. The next piece that goes along with that then is when there's not enough money in special ed is mandated. There's no waiting list. If you're eligible for special ed, the services have to be provided by the public school. So when there's not enough money being funded in special ed, your local school districts then have to dip into their general fund. And so when they have big deficits that aren't funding special ed, they're going into the general fund, shoring up the special ed money, and then that affects all students in terms of raises for teachers, other programs that they want for general ed. So it all works together in a school system.
So when you talk about students in today's world, I know there was a time where there wasn't even a special ed department in schools. We were talking earlier, my mom was a special education teacher for many years back in the Clay County school district and in that area. And when she was growing up, there was not even a special ed type of thing. Today, the schools have to take everybody that comes, whether they're special needs or not. And some kids really need a lot of extra care to go along with that. Are there options there for the school districts, or is that just you got to do it, you got to take care of it no matter what?
If you have a child or a youth that qualifies for special education services based upon federal guidelines and related to how one qualifies, you have to provide a program that will meet their needs so that they can make progress in the general ed curriculum. It doesn't mean that you have to provide, the top-notch best level of everything, but it does mean that you need to provide a program that is designated and designed so that they're going to have educational benefit in a free and appropriate public education. And we have to take any child that is eligible and whose parents want those services, and the team needs to determine what they need to be successful and make progress in their curriculum with no waiting lists and no excuses for not providing services, whether you have money to do everything or not.
Talk about today's special ed. Are the students integrated in other classrooms? Are they in individual classrooms, or do they have to go to special schools or buildings, facilities to do this?
Well, of course, special education students can look very different. One size doesn't fit all. And so we look at typically in the school population, the state of Kansas right now is running just a little over 15.5%, 15.7% of the students in public education are in special education or have those services. And those services can range from children that are 100% in the general ed classroom, but just have accommodations and modifications and a little bit of specially designed instruction within those general ed environments so that they can excel and make progress in the curriculum, to some students that really need to have more time in a special classroom with more intensive services and supports. So there's a range out there, but I'd say 80% of all students in special ed are mostly in general education.
When you look at the state, you said one size don't fit all for students, but how does that work in the state? You're in Northwest Kansas. You represent students in Northwest Kansas and school systems in Northwest Kansas. But as you move east to some of the bigger districts, how does that work in the funding mechanism? Is it fair across the state, or are some systems obviously you mentioned earlier, get more money than others. Is that rural versus big city?
It really isn't so much rural versus big city, although you always have issues related to economies of scale. Our area is 19,000 square miles. And so we have about 1,000 students to 1,200 on IEPs. And so we may have one student in Goodland that has, let's just say we're going to talk autism. Let's say we have one or two students in Goodland with autism, and one student in Colby, and 5 students in Atwood. Whereas in a city or a larger place, they may have all those students right in one district. And so their experts can be right there, whereas we have to have people that will travel and provide those additional supports. So you end up having more time on the road and some issues related to that. However, the way the funding formula is set up in Kansas is it's not census-based, which is good because we have rural and urban, and it's not based upon how involved or severe a diagnosis or disability is, which of course there's federal cautions with that because you don't want people over-identifying to get money or identifying at a more severe level. So there's no incentive to do that. And so what Kansas has done is they decided that we're going to leave this more at a local decision level based upon the services you're providing and what you need there. And then you tie it to the staff that are involved. So you get reimbursement in special education based upon the special ed staff that you employ. 1.0 FTE of a licensed teacher runs around, well, I'd say around, it varies, it goes up and down based upon other issues like transportation and catastrophic aid, but around $30,000. And then for paraeducators, you get 40% of whatever that amount is for the teachers. And so the funding is coming down based upon local districts' decisions on services and needs.
Well, our guest today is Kathy Kersenbrock-Ostmeyer, and she's Director of Special Ed for Northwest Kansas Educational Service Center. And Kathy, you want to hold on. I know there's some people that want to change the funding mechanism and maybe the formula goes with that. We're going to take a break. We'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to Forward Ever, leading in challenging times. Back after this.
Challenging times are when experience matters. We allow our clients to live with confidence. Long-term trusted relationships, Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back to Forward Ever, leading in challenging times. I'm Gary Shorman with my guest, Kathy Kersenbrock-Ostmeyer. Her friends call her KKO or Kathy KO, one of those two. Anyway, Kathy, we've had a good conversation about special ed, but I know there's some people that actually And there are people that can make this decision. There are lawmakers in Topeka that want to change the formula. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm very concerned about that. And as you mentioned earlier, that's why I made it a point to be sure to be in Topeka to testify earlier this week. I send in a lot of letters at both the state and the federal level on addressing funding. And my concern, especially at the state level, is that there are lawmakers that keep wanting to say we're funding public education at the full level. We're meeting the requirements. However, they are under the Gannon ruling, but they aren't necessarily under special education. In statute, it does indicate a 92% of excess cost should be funded. And currently we're down this year. Some of the statistics indicate, as low as 68% of that excess cost. And so when we talk about what's going on in funding, I hear some legislators talking about the need to look at the formula differently, that money that's going in from your local bonds should be counted and other types of things. And so we're really funding more than our fair share. And we know that that's not the way it was intended originally, nor the way the formula was developed originally. And so I feel like it's a little bit of a game trying to say, oh, yes, we do fund it because this goes in and you didn't count that earlier, or that goes in and you didn't count that. And I'm saying, well, let's go back to the way it was originally designed, and let's make sure that we have the needs met for the children and youth we're serving locally. And that just means shoring up that special education funding. And especially now when we have huge excesses in state revenues.
One of the things that I know people that don't have a special needs student or a child may not understand. What do you tell I mean, you've been involved with this for a long time. What do you tell those parents that say, boy, we don't need all this money? And they may be legislators, they may be leaders in the community, whatever. We don't need this until you have a student or a child that has that special need. How do you explain the need for those services to those parents?
Well, I have lots of ideas there that I share with parents and legislators. First of all, on a local and more individual basis, I talk about the fact that there are a lot of children and youth that have needs, and we can't afford to lose any of those individuals. We want them to be able to go into society, hold jobs, pay their share of taxes, and do well. And so I have lots of stories, which too many to tell today in our time, but of people that struggled in school, but with the special supports that they have, go to college, go to trade school, and become very successful. They probably couldn't get there without the supports of special education. As a nation, I talk about the fact that we in the United States, we can't afford to lose any kids. Just by nature of the populations in India and China, they'll have more gifted kids than we have kids altogether. So if we're going to continue to compete at the world level, we really can't afford to lose any of our children and youth. And special ed provides those supports at all levels for the gifted student, as well as students that are average intellect but have some type of a learning disability such as dyslexia or dysgraphia that can be overcome with intensive specially designed instruction. So there's so much of a need from that perspective. Then locally, when we're not able to serve the students with special needs based upon the dollars we receive federally and from our state, then as I mentioned earlier, local districts have to dip into the other pot, the general fund, and shore it up there. And then that affects other programs and things they'd like to do in their district. And so it just all works together. And it's important for all of us to support each other so that everybody benefits.
Kathy, one thing I know, the state has worked with a special education task force. I know they put that in place to help answer the questions that you and I have been talking about. But I also understand that this group has never met. Is that correct?
It is correct. I'm very frustrated about that. Actually, I was appointed to be on the Special Education Funding Task Force by Dr. Watson, the Commissioner of Education at the Department of Education. And what I know about it is last legislative session, there was a lot of discussion about needing to fund special ed at the 92%. And the discussion from the chair of the Education Committee, Representative Williams, was that, hey, this is a complex, detailed issue. Let's have a special education funding task force and study that. At this point, she has not called for that task force to meet. And that was one of the issues that I testified as well on when I was up there on Tuesday, is that this is very complicated and we do need to have that funding task force come together and look at the details and the complex issues to really come up with a good recommendation for the 24 legislative session. So I'm hoping she'll call the task force, but the information I have now is that she's not really willing to do that.
Well, Kathy, appreciate all your work doing this. Appreciate helping the kids that are the special needs kid, not only Northwest Kansas, but you meet with groups across Kansas. Earlier we talked, who all is in the group where you guys as a team get together and discuss issues, statewide issues that involves really districts from around Kansas?
Yes, once a month, the special ed directors from each region in Kansas meet. I'm in Region 8, which is Clay Center, Concordia, Beloit, Phillipsburg, Russell, Hayes, Great Bend, Larned, and the Northwest Kansas Educational Service Center. So we're a large area. And then there's regions in different parts of the state, and they all talk together. We're all connected with the Kansas Association of Special Ed Administrators. And so we communicate frequently through listservs and emails. And then also we work with our partners at the national level, the Council for Exceptional Children and the Council of Administrators of Special Ed.
Well, it takes a lot of work to get this done, Kathy. Appreciate the work you do. Thank you for taking care of the special needs kids. And if you would, keep us posted on the progress of this.
I will do, and thank you.
Thanks for listening to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times with our guest, Kathy Kersenbrock-Ostmeyer, the Director of Special Ed for Northwest Kansas Educational Service Center. Thank you for listening to Forward Ever. It's brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. Thanks for listening. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.
It's now on our watch. America's been tested before, many times. We salute those that are on the front line, in our own backyard and well beyond, and those that lead us to a better tomorrow. Our roots run deep, and so do our relationships. Let's move forward together. Live with confidence. Worth Wealth Management. There is a tomorrow that shines upon a better day. We'll move forward together.